My name is Harper Klein. I was 31 years old when I got fired somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, and I didn't cry, scream, or panic. I smiled. The email hit my inbox while the plane lights were dimmed and the cabin had that exhausted recycled air silence that settles in after hour 3. The flight attendant had already stopped offering me pretzels, probably because I'd eaten 4 bags in rapid succession, and she'd started watching me with genuine concern. Economy class. Middle seat. 10 days, 3 countries, 4 flights. One deal worth $380 million, and I was crammed between a snoring stranger and a window showing nothing but endless black water. Subject line termination notice, effective immediately. No warning, no conversation, just a block of corporate language so cold it felt automated. My access revoked, credentials suspended, instructions not to return to company property. It read like it had been written by an HR algorithm that charged by the word and had never felt a human emotion in its existence. The sender was Walter Aldrich, CEO of Aldrich Infrastructure Group. The same man who'd looked me in the eye 11 days earlier clasped my hand with both of his, like a politician sealing a promise, and told me I was the only person he trusted to close the Bridger deal. The Bridger deal. 3 utility clients, 3 regions. Grid-scale solar battery storage, substation, modernization. 10 months of my life. Every relationship, every site visit, every 300 a.m. conference call because someone in Europe didn't understand time zones. $380 million over 5 years, the biggest deal in company history. I'd signed in the final preliminary agreement in Brazil 8 hours earlier. Now I was unemployed at 35,000 feet, wedged into a seat that smelled faintly of reheated pasta, staring at an email that erased 7 years of my career with one click. I didn't panic. I tried logging into the project management system. Access denied. Company email gone. Shared drive with 10 months of work locked. They'd scrubbed me from every system like I was a virus that needed quarantining. I reached into my backpack and pulled out my second laptop. That was Ethan's idea, my boyfriend. Contracts and compliance. The kind of man who reads terms of service agreements for fun and finds loopholes before most people finish the first paragraph. 8 months earlier, he'd sat me down and explained calmly, methodically, exactly how companies destroy departing employees. If they ever bury you, he'd said you need clean hands and clean hardware. Everything on their systems belongs to them. Everything on yours belongs to you. Never mix the two. I powered the laptop on. 3 emails waited for me, from people who had no idea I'd just been fired and who were very much expecting to hear from me. They thought terminating me mid-flight would leave me stranded and desperate. Instead, they'd just cut the final thread connecting me to a company that had been using me as a workhorse while treating me like a placeholder. I closed both laptops, shoved the world's worst travel pillow behind my neck, and against all logic fell asleep for the first time in 4 days. But to understand how I got there, you need to know what started unraveling 6 months earlier. And trust me, none of it was subtle. 6 months before that email detonated my career at cruising altitude, I started noticing patterns that didn't add up. And I don't mean subtle hints or vague vibes. I mean the kind of warning signs that flash so brightly you feel stupid for ignoring them afterward. The first was the promotion that vanished. I'd been running international project development at Aldrich Infrastructure Group for 7 years. 7 years of closing deals nobody else could close, flying to sites nobody else wanted to visit, spending holidays in airports and weekends on conference calls with executives who needed their hands held through decisions they were terrified to make. I knew the numbers. I knew the clients. More importantly, the clients knew me. So when the vice president of global operations role opened up, I assumed reasonably that it was mine. I had the track record. I had written recommendations from utility executives in 4 different countries, several of whom explicitly requested me by name for their projects. I had built the pipeline that leadership liked to brag about in earnings calls. Then they gave the role to Bennett Aldrich, Walter Aldrich's nephew. Bennett had been with the company for 19 months. His qualifications were flexible. An MBA from a school that advertised on highway billboards, a brief stint at a consulting firm that no longer existed, and 18 months of sitting in on meetings I ran while occasionally asking questions that made clients visibly uncomfortable. I once watched him ask a utility executive if solar panels stored sunlight for nighttime use. The silence that followed was so painful I had to jump in and redirect the conversation before we lost a $40 million contract to secondhand embarrassment alone. At the promotion announcement party, Bennett found me near the coffee station. He shook my hand with confidence that hadn't been earned yet. "Harper, I'm really looking forward to working with you," he said. "Learning from you. Uncle Walter says you're the best closer we've got." I smiled, said congratulations. Didn't mention that closer was apparently a different category than leader, and that the distinction seemed to depend entirely on whose last name was on the building. That was red flag number 1. Red flag number 2 showed up quietly and then kept repeating until it was impossible to ignore. Credit theft. It started small. I spent 3 months developing a proposal for a major grid upgrade project in Nevada. Desert heat so brutal, my rental car's dashboard flashed warnings about exterior temperatures. Permit research that forced me to become fluent in zoning regulations I never wanted to know existed. Interconnection studies that involved 47 conference calls, each one somehow more tedious than the last. When the client signed the internal announcement credited the win to global operations under Bennett Aldrich's leadership. My name appeared in a footnote, technical consultation. Like I was the IT person who fixed the projector instead of the woman who built the entire deal and flew out to close it. I brought it up to my manager. He made a face like I'd asked him to solve a complex math equation while juggling. "You should focus on team success," he said carefully, "not individual recognition." "There was no team," I replied. "I did the work alone." Bennett attended one meeting. He nodded. The conversation ended with a reminder about corporate alignment and my valuable role as an executor. Executor, not leader. The third red flag was Bennett himself. He'd developed credit theft into an art form. He had an almost supernatural instinct for showing up at exactly the right moment to claim work he hadn't done. He'd wander into client meetings I was leading, ask 1 or 2 surface-level questions, then somehow emerge as the project lead in the follow-up reports. He CC'd himself on email chains he had nothing to do with, then forwarded them to Walter with commentary that made it sound like he'd been driving the project all along. Watching him attempt actual technical work was almost cruel. On one call, he explained battery storage systems as basically like a really big phone charger, but for buildings. The client's chief engineer looked like he was experiencing a minor stroke. I muted myself so no one could hear me laugh, then unmuted to salvage what was left of the meeting. On a site visit, Bennett showed up in Italian leather shoes and a tailored suit. By hour 2, he'd stepped in something unpleasant, complained about the heat 6 times, and asked the foreman why the panels weren't facing the sun directly. The foreman, a man with 30 years in the industry, looked at me like he was choosing between homicide and early retirement. I explained tracking systems. Bennett nodded like he'd known that all along. Worst of all, he made promises to clients without checking with engineering. Timelines we couldn't meet. Specifications we didn't offer. Pricing that didn't exist in any budget I'd ever seen. Then he'd forward the email chain to me with a cheerful note, "Can you make this work?" But the moment I truly knew that I was done, came during a board lunch 4 months before my firing. I was in the adjacent conference room prepping materials for a client presentation. The door between the rooms hadn't latched properly. Voices carried. One of the board members laughed. Then Walter's voice, clear as day. "Harper's good at what she does. Excellent closer. But she's not leadership material. Doesn't have the right presence. Clients love her, but we need her in the field, not the boardroom." I stood there holding a binder full of work that had made these people millions. 7 years reduced to field work. That afternoon, I went back to my desk, opened a private browser, and started researching how to form an LLC. That night, I told Ethan everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They don't see you as a person. They see you as a tool, and tools don't get promoted, they get used." That was the night I stopped hoping things would change, and the night I started planning for what came next. Once you realize you're no longer part of the future, someone else is planning something inside you goes very still. Not angry, not dramatic, just clear. That night, Ethan didn't try to comfort me with empty optimism or talk me down from my frustration. He asked practical questions instead, the kind that turned pain into structure. How exposed are you? What do they actually know? What's on their systems versus yours? We spread everything out across his kitchen table, contracts, timelines, client lists, travel schedules. He moved through it all with the calm precision of someone who understood exactly how companies closed ranks when they felt threatened. They're already positioning you as an asset, not a future leader, he said quietly. That means the moment you become inconvenient, they'll cut you loose. When they do, they'll try to lock you out of the industry. That was the moment we stopped talking hypotheticals. Over the next few weeks, we built something quietly. No announcements, no investors, no flashy branding, just a clean legal entity with no visible ties back to Aldrich infrastructure. Ethan handled compliance and structure. I handled relationships carefully, indirectly, never crossing a line that could be traced. Different coffee shops, different devices, different email addresses, ridiculous code names that made us laugh but served their purpose. I kept flying for Aldrich, kept closing deals, kept smiling in meetings where Bennett talked over me while saying nothing of substance. Outwardly, I was still the reliable closer. Internally, I was preparing for the moment when that reliability would no longer protect me. The Bridger deal was supposed to be my masterpiece. 3 utility clients, 3 regions, coordinated infrastructure upgrades that required years of trust building and months of technical synchronization, grid-scale solar, battery storage, substation modernization. The kind of project that became a case study if it succeeded and a cautionary tale if it didn't. Getting there was brutal. Frankfurt came first. A delayed connection out of Newark meant sprinting through terminals, sweating through my shirt, then getting pulled aside by TSA because my equipment samples looked unusual. I spent 20 minutes explaining transformer specification sheets to a very serious man who nodded like he understood and clearly didn't. My checked bag went to Amsterdam without me. I spent my first 2 days in Germany wearing the same clothes I'd been traveling in for nearly 20 hours. Klaus Richter, who ran infrastructure procurement for Ryan Valley Power, did not care. He'd been burned by American contractors before missed deadlines cost overruns equipment that didn't match specifications. He trusted performance. Everything else was noise. I crawled through substations in rain that felt personal, reviewed specs until my eyes crossed, expanded my German vocabulary by 300 technical terms I'd never use in polite conversation. On day 3, he took me to a facility with problems caused by another contractor and watched to see how I handled it. 2 hours later, the issue was identified and documented. Klaus nodded once. At dinner that night, he leaned back and asked, "What happens if Aldrich has internal problems?" I answered carefully, honestly, and left him with something better than reassurance. Options. Austin was next. Customs held me for 45 minutes, convinced I was transporting something dangerous. I explained transformer specs 6 times. Eventually, someone higher up waved me through with a shrug. Wade Thornton ran Lawnier Grid Solutions. No patience for corporate nonsense. We walked an active construction site together, talking supply chains, insurance coverage, backup plans. Halfway through, he stopped and looked at me. "You're the reason I'm still in this deal," he said. "Your company's got nice branding, but you actually know what's happening." I mentioned casually that I believed in lean operations and direct accountability. He raised an eyebrow. "You starting something?" "I believe in keeping options open." "Smart," he said. "Keep me posted." São Paulo was last. Visa issues. Long lines. Broken Portuguese colliding with broken English. Marco, the CEO of Verde Energia, ran his company at a pace that terrified most contractors. 4 meetings in 1 day. A 2-hour site visit in brutal heat. Dinner that stretched past midnight. My boots were still missing. My feet were destroyed. I was running on adrenaline and caffeine. Marco didn't care. When he walked me to my cab, he gripped my shoulder and said, "You are the deal, Harper, not your company, you." 3 cities, 3 clients, 3 seeds planted in soil Aldrich didn't even know existed. I flew home feeling like I was carrying something dangerous. 2 days before that trip, my younger sister Lena had called asking to meet for coffee. At the time, I didn't hear the alarm bells. I should have. Looking back, the coffee with my sister felt wrong in ways I didn't want to acknowledge at the time. Lena and I had never been particularly close. She was 3 years younger, better at charming our parents, better at sounding successful than actually being successful. She'd turned a mediocre business degree and an impressive vocabulary into a series of consulting roles that never seemed to last longer than a year, but always sounded impressive at family dinners. Growing up, she was the one who could talk her way out of consequences. I was the responsible one. When I saved money from my first job, my parents suggested I help Lena with a startup idea. When it failed, which it did spectacularly, no one expected her to pay me back. So when she called asking to catch up, I should have been cautious. We met at a cafe near my apartment. She showed up late as usual, wearing the polished confidence of someone who needed other people to believe she was doing better than she actually was. At first, the conversation stayed light. How's work? How's Ethan Travel treating you? Okay? Then the questions shifted. Are things stable at Aldrich? Any big changes coming? Still happy there? Ever thought about doing your own thing? That last one should have set off every alarm I had. She'd never cared about my career before, except as something to compare unfavorably to her own alleged potential. But I was distracted, tired already thinking about my upcoming trip, so I gave her vague answers. Same old grind. Lots of travel. Busy. She nodded, asked follow-ups that felt oddly specific. Did I know Bennett Aldrich? What did I think of him? Had I heard anything about leadership restructuring? I told her Bennett was the CEO's nephew and left it at that. 2 weeks later, at 35,000 feet, staring at my termination notice, those questions replayed themselves with uncomfortable clarity. Ethan figured it out before I did. We were back at his apartment when my severance paperwork came through an hour after the termination email. He went through it with the intense focus he usually reserved for contracts with teeth. Around page 6, he stopped. There's a reference here, he said. Credible third-party information suggesting competitive activity. My chest went cold. Show me. There it was, buried in legal language designed to look harmless. Third-party sources, competitive preparations, grounds for immediate termination without notice. Only a handful of people knew about my exit plan. I called Lena from the airport the moment I landed. Harper, she said brightly, how was the trip? How did you know I was traveling right now? A pause. You mentioned it. I said I had travel coming up. I didn't say where or when. How did you know? Longer pause. Why does my termination paperwork reference third-party sources I pressed? Who else knew what I was building? Silence. Finally, she sighed. Okay, I've been talking to Bennett Aldrich. My stomach dropped. We met at a networking event a few months ago. He's actually really smart, visionary. What did you tell him, Lena? Another pause, longer this time. Not everything, just general stuff. Did you tell him about my plans? The silence answered for her. They offered me a job, she said finally. Director of Business Development. Real salary. Real title. They used you to get to me. That's not fair, she snapped. I'm building my own path. You gave them exactly what they needed to time my termination. Mid-flight. No service. No chance to protect my relationships. Her tone hardened. The voice she used when she was cornered and decided to attack instead of admit fault. Maybe if you'd helped me more, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. You've always thought you were better than me. I thought you were capable of more than this. She hung up on me. That night, Ethan and I laid everything out, the timeline, the questions, the timing of my firing. She didn't just leak information, he said quietly. She helped them plan it. The HR meeting was scheduled for the next morning, and I already knew they were going to try to bury me. I didn't sleep that night. Ethan and I sat at his kitchen table until nearly dawn, documents spread out like evidence in a trial that hadn't officially begun yet. He highlighted clauses, circled language, flagged phrases that looked harmless, but carried teeth. They're going to make this feel procedural, he said, rubbing his eyes. Polite, sympathetic. Like cooperation is the obvious next step. And somewhere in the paperwork I said there'll be something designed to erase me. He nodded. Exactly. At 8:45 a.m., I walked into Aldrich headquarters for the last time. The lobby looked the same. Polished floors, neutral art. The kind of corporate calm designed to make everything feel inevitable. People who used to greet me by name suddenly found their screens fascinating. Conversations stopped when I passed. Security intercepted me before I reached the elevators. A young guard I'd never seen before checked my ID 3 times, made 2 phone calls, then escorted me upstairs like I was a liability instead of a person. We passed my old office. My desk had already been cleared. 7 years reduced to a blank surface and a coffee mug I'd never liked anyway. The conference room had 4 people waiting. Janet from HR, a lawyer whose expression suggested he slept just fine at night, someone from risk management who never looked up, and Bennett Aldrich seated at the head of the table like he belonged there. They walked me through the termination script. Position eliminated. Restructuring. Appreciation for my years of service. Severance equal to 3 months' salary. Then the lawyer slid the agreement across the table. 36 months. Industry-wide non-compete. No working for competitors. No starting a company. No contact with any current or former clients. They weren't just firing me. They were trying to erase me. Bennett leaned forward, smiling. No hard feelings, Harper. We just need to move in a more collaborative direction. I picked up the document and read slowly. Page 8, paragraph 4. The clause Ethan had warned me about. Any business relationship with current or former Aldrich clients prohibited for 3 years. I set the document down. I'm not signing this. The room went quiet. The lawyer launched into an explanation about industry standards and reasonableness. Bennett actually laughed. You're walking away from 3 months of salary over paperwork. I met his eyes. I'm walking away because this paperwork is designed to bury me. I stood and left. 2 hours later, my phone rang. Klaus Richter here, the voice said. We heard you left the company. I was terminated, I replied. Effective immediately. A pause. Then we are reassessing. Within 72 hours, all 3 Bridger clients froze the deal. Aldrich didn't see it coming. I did. The first freeze came quietly the way avalanches always start with a shift most people don't hear. Klaus Richter called again the next morning. His tone was still professional, but the warmth was gone, replaced by something sharper. Harper, we have concerns about continuity, he said. Your role was foundational. I understand, I replied, and I meant it. By noon, Wade Thornton followed. No small talk, no polite cushioning. I sat through a meeting with Bennett this morning, he said. He couldn't answer basic questions. That's not a gap, that's a void. 2 days later, Verde Energia sent formal notice. Key person risk, leadership uncertainty, corporate language for a simple truth. They trusted me, not the logo on the letterhead. Inside, Aldrich panic set in fast. Bennett flew to Texas to reassure Lanier Grid Solutions. Denise, one of the few people still texting me from inside, told me what happened. 20 minutes of buzzwords, zero substance. When Wade asked about battery degradation cycles, Bennett froze. Tried to bluff, failed. The meeting ended early. Dinner canceled. Contract withdrawn 2 days later. Ryan Valley followed with a devastatingly polite email explaining they could not proceed without the leadership continuity that had defined the engagement. Verde held on for 3 weeks. Marco was patient but not foolish. Aldrich sent 3 executives to Sao Paulo. None spoke Portuguese. None understood local regulations. One missed a meeting entirely. Marco called me that night. I want to work with you, he said simply. Whatever you're building, I'm in. That was the moment Ironwood Infrastructure stopped being a contingency plan. Within 72 hours, Ethan finalized compliance. Denise joined as operations director. Nathan, an engineer I trusted with my life, took technical lead. We worked out of a rented industrial space that smelled faintly of oil and metal. No fancy offices, no speeches. Just work. I sent proposals to all 3 clients. Leaner structure, direct accountability, same scope, no middlemen. All 3 signed within 3 weeks. 380 million walked out the door with me. Walter Aldrich called twice, left voicemails that shifted from anger to confusion. I never called back. What happened next wasn't revenge in the dramatic cinematic sense. There were no raised voices, no confrontations in boardrooms, no victory speeches. It was quieter than that, more devastating. Aldrich Infrastructure didn't collapse all at once, it cracked. Internally, the narrative shifted every week. First, it was temporary pauses, then client-driven reassessments, then emergency meetings that ran late into the night. Denise kept me informed not out of loyalty to Aldrich, but because she understood exactly what kind of story was unfolding. Bennett's first solo client presentation became legend in less than a month. He flew to Texas, convinced he could smooth things over with confidence and polish. What he delivered was a masterclass in sounding important while saying nothing. When Wade Thornton asked a basic question about battery degradation rates and replacement cycles, something anyone actually managing the project should have known, Bennett stumbled. He tried buzzwords, then warranties, then changed the subject. Wade ended the meeting early. 2 days later, Lanier Grid Solutions formally withdrew. Ryan Valley followed a week after that. Klaus Richter sent a short, devastating email explaining that without leadership continuity, their organization could not proceed. Corporate language stripped of all illusion. Verde Energia lasted the longest. Marco was patient, but patience isn't blind. After 3 executives failed to demonstrate competence or even show up on time, he pulled the plug. Inside Aldrich, the damage was impossible to hide. $380 million didn't just vanish from the pipeline. It left a crater. Walter Aldrich was removed as CEO 4 months later. The board cited strategic differences, which is corporate shorthand for "you lost us everything." His confident predictions about his nephew quietly disappeared from company decks. Bennett resigned 2 weeks after that to pursue other opportunities. I heard he tried launching a consulting practice. I give it 6 months. Lena's new title lasted exactly 43 days. When the cost-cutting started, Director of Business Development was suddenly a luxury Aldrich couldn't afford. She called me once, then texted, then sent a long email explaining that she was sorry that families should stick together, that it was just business. I didn't respond. 6 months after Ironwood Infrastructure officially launched, I walked into our new office for the first time knowing it was truly ours. The space wasn't glamorous. The conference table was secondhand. The chairs didn't match. Someone had hung a simple metal sign near the entrance. Ironwood Infrastructure, founded by Harper Klein. I stood there longer than I meant to, 7 years at Aldrich, and my name had never appeared on anything that mattered. Now it was on the wall. The Bridger project was fully underway. Ryan Valley had broken ground on 2 substations. Lawner's first solar installation was ahead of schedule. Verdi had expanded their contract twice. The total value across all 3 clients was tracking toward $420 million over 5 years. Ethan and I got engaged 2 months after the company stabilized. Small ceremony, no spectacle. He still handles contracts and compliance for Ironwood now as an external consultant. Turns out having someone who understands the rules and cares about you is worth more than any executive title. My parents called eventually. My mother said I was being too hard on Lena. That family should forgive. That holding grudges wasn't healthy. I asked if Lena had told her what she'd done. She said she didn't understand corporate things, and that I was being legalistic. I told her I loved her, and that I wasn't having this conversation again. She didn't call for 3 months after that. When she finally did, she didn't mention Lena. The funny thing about all of this is that I never planned revenge. I didn't burn anything down. I didn't sabotage anyone. I just built something of my own, protected it carefully, and stepped aside while the people who underestimated me created their own problems. They did the rest themselves. And when someone finally offers you a seat at a table you built with your own hands, you understand something very clearly. You never needed their permission.